Hello everyone, thanks for listening to my stories. I will tell you another story very interesting from real life. Part 1, The Dream Vacation That Wasn't. So, my girlfriend, let's call her Sarah, and I had been dating for about 3 years, and we decided it was finally time to take a big, romantic trip together. You know, one of those Instagram perfect vacations where you sip cocktails by the ocean, take cute sunset photos, and finally get away from the chaos of everyday life. We settled on a week-long stay at a beach resort in Mexico. It had glowing reviews, an all-inclusive package, and promised a paradise on earth. Sounded perfect, right? Well, spoiler alert, it was anything but. The first red flag popped up even before we got on the plane. Our flight got delayed by 6 hours due to some mechanical issue, which meant we spent way too much time sitting at the airport, surviving on overpriced sandwiches and bad coffee. By the time we actually boarded, we were already exhausted, but we figured, hey, once we get there, it'll all be worth it. Narrator, it was not. When we landed in Mexico, we were greeted by an absolute mess at customs. Lines were ridiculously long, people were arguing, and it felt like the airport staff was just as done with life as we were. 2 hours later, we finally made it out, grabbed our bags, and found our shuttle to the resort. The moment we stepped onto the bus, I noticed something weird. Our driver looked way too excited to be driving a bunch of exhausted tourists at midnight. Like, cartoonishly enthusiastic. I should have trusted my instincts when he started speeding through the dark, winding roads, blasting reggaeton like we were at a rave. But at that point, I was too tired to care. We arrived at the resort around 1:30 a.m. It was eerily quiet. The lobby looked nice enough, but when we checked in, the receptionist gave us this weird smile and said, "Welcome to your adventure." I laughed it off, assuming it was just some quirky way of saying, "Enjoy your stay." Oh, how wrong I was. By the time we got to our room, all we wanted to do was crash. But the moment we stepped inside, I knew something was off. First, it smelled weird, like mildew mixed with cheap air freshener trying way too hard to cover it up. Then, there was the bed. One sad, lumpy mattress that looked like it had seen better days, in the 90s. The sheets felt damp, and when I pulled them back, I swear I saw something skitter away. My brain refused to process what it was. Nope. Not tonight. Sarah, already on edge, checked the bathroom and came out looking horrified. "Babe, the shower's full of hair. And I think someone left their underwear in here." At that point, I wanted to march back to the front desk and demand a new room, but it was almost 2 a.m., and I barely had the energy to stay upright. "We'll deal with it in the morning," I sighed, trying to convince myself that I could somehow sleep in this nightmare. Then, just as we turned off the lights, we heard it. A scratching noise. Coming from inside the walls. I'm not gonna lie, at this point I was absolutely convinced that we'd made a huge mistake. Here we were, in the middle of the night, in a foreign country, in a room that seemed to be falling apart at the seams. I tried to tell myself it was probably just a harmless little animal, maybe a mouse or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The scratching continued for a good 5 minutes, and then, suddenly, it stopped. Absolute silence. For a second, I thought maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, but then I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone or something was walking around the room above us. I looked at Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with anxiety. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, my throat suddenly dry. "I don't know what it is. Maybe we should just call the front desk and get out of here." But before I could even move, the scratching started again, louder this time. It was coming from the wall near the head of the bed, where the bedframe creaked ominously. I stood up, feeling like the room was closing in on me. I opened the door to the hallway, but it was dark and still. No one was around. My gut told me that whatever was going on, it wasn't natural. With my heart racing, I decided to get the hotel staff involved. I walked down the hallway, trying not to freak out, and found a worker near the elevator. She looked at me with the same eerie smile the receptionist had given us earlier. "Is everything okay with your room?" she asked in that overly cheerful tone. "No, actually," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's something weird going on in our room. Scratching noises. Footsteps. It's freaking us out. She just nodded, like she was completely unfazed. Ah, yes. Room 317. That's a special room. But don't worry. It's part of the experience. My jaw dropped. The experience? I repeated, incredulous. What do you mean, the experience? But before I could get an answer, she just smiled and said, I'll have someone look into it. You can go back to your room now. I didn't know what to think. A special room? It felt like she was giving me a cryptic clue to something much worse. Reluctantly, I headed back to the room, but I knew I wasn't going to sleep until I figured this out. Back in the room, Sarah was on the verge of a breakdown. She had the blankets pulled up to her chin, her eyes darting around like she expected something to jump out at any moment. I tried to calm her down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The scratching noise started again, but this time, it was followed by something far more sinister. A voice. A whisper. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then it became clearer. Help, me. I froze, my blood running cold. It was coming from inside the wall. I tried to reach out to touch the wall, but as soon as I did, the voice stopped. I pulled my hand back, horrified. Sarah was shaking now. This isn't real, right? This has to be a nightmare. I wished it was. But I knew we couldn't just ignore it anymore. I grabbed my phone, trying to call the front desk, but the line was dead. Nothing but static. Suddenly, the door to our room slammed open. Standing there in the doorway was a man, disheveled, pale, and looking like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were ragged, and he had a wild look in his eyes. You need to leave, he rasped, voice hoarse. Now. Before it gets you too. I stepped back, but the man pushed past me, his breath coming in rapid bursts. They know. They always know, he muttered. Room 317, it's cursed. It's a trap. Before I could react, he turned and ran down the hallway, disappearing into the darkness. We were left standing there, stunned, trying to process everything. I turned to Sarah. We need to get out of here. Now. But when we tried to leave, the hallway was completely different. The walls seemed to close in, the lights flickering as if something was messing with the power. The resort we had once thought of as paradise had transformed into something out of a nightmare. And that was just the beginning. As we tried to leave our room, the hallway was completely different from when we had first walked down it. The once clean, well-lit space now felt suffocating and oppressive. The walls seemed to have shifted slightly, as if the entire resort was rearranging itself. The warm, tropical air had turned stale and cold. The flickering lights made the shadows look like they were crawling across the walls. We ran to the elevator, but it was out of service. Of course. That would have been too easy. The stairs, however, were still accessible, so we took them two at a time, not daring to look back. When we reached the ground floor, we had hoped to make a break for the exit, but the lobby had turned into something straight out of a horror film. The once pristine marble floors were cracked, the ceiling had water stains, and the receptionist's desk was empty, except for a single flickering candle. The soft scent of mildew lingered in the air, and a cold chill seemed to settle into our bones. What the hell is going on? Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't have an answer. I just knew we needed to get out, but something about this place felt wrong. It wasn't the tropical paradise we had been promised. The resort had somehow transformed into a nightmarish version of itself, and it felt like it was alive, watching us. Suddenly, the door to the lobby opened by itself with a slow creak. We froze. Standing in the doorway was the same man who had warned us. His eyes were wide, his face pale, and his clothes were even more disheveled. His hair looked matted, and he was gasping for breath as if he'd been running for hours. Listen to me, he said in a frantic whisper. You have to leave now. You have no idea what you're dealing with. This place, it's not what it seems. It's been cursed for years. And once it gets a hold of you, there's no escape. I stepped forward, trying to make sense of his words. What do you mean? What's happening here? His eyes darted to the empty lobby around us, as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows. He grabbed my arm. It's the walls. The rooms. The people who stay here, they never leave. They get trapped in a loop. Every time they think they're escaping, the resort changes. Traps them in different versions of itself. I pulled back, disbelief flooding my mind. You're saying this place is alive? He nodded, his face grave. Exactly. And it feeds on fear. The more scared you get, the stronger it becomes. It was all fine for the first few years, but then something happened. The curse got stronger. The resort became a prison. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at Sarah, who was now visibly shaking, her eyes wide in terror. We need to get to the beach, he continued, his voice urgent. The beach is the only place that hasn't been touched. There's a boat there. It's the only way out. Before I could process his words, the lights in the lobby flickered again. The floor beneath us seemed to tremble. A low growl echoed from somewhere in the depths of the resort, making the air vibrate with dread. Go, the man shouted. You have to go now. We didn't hesitate. With no other choice, we bolted for the door, the man right behind us. As soon as we stepped outside, it felt like the air itself was pushing against us, trying to keep us from escaping. The beach, which should have been beautiful, was shrouded in mist. The moon hung eerily low in the sky, casting long shadows on the sand. We sprinted toward the water, desperate for the boat the man had mentioned. But when we reached the shoreline, we didn't find a boat. Instead, there was only a massive, dark shape, something far worse than I ever imagined. It was as if the ocean itself had risen up, a massive tidal wave that was frozen in place, hovering over the beach like a monstrous presence. It loomed above us, crashing and swirling in place, and in the center of the swirling water, I saw something moving. Something alive. I turned to the man, but he was gone. Just vanished. Suddenly, a voice echoed from behind us. Did you really think you could escape? I spun around, my heart stopping. A figure stood in the doorway of the resort, silhouetted against the mist. It was the receptionist only, now, she looked nothing like the woman who had greeted us upon our arrival. Her face was distorted, a wicked grin stretched across her features, and her eyes were empty, black pits. The ocean behind us began to churn, and the sky darkened, as if the entire world was closing in. This is where it ends, she said, her voice now cold and hollow. You're never leaving here. You're part of the resort now. And then the waves came crashing toward us. The waves crashed forward with an almost deafening roar, surging toward the beach like they were alive, hungry for us. The receptionist's wicked smile grew wider as she watched us freeze in terror, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the storm. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and the once calm beach had transformed into a battleground of forces we couldn't understand. Sarah grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the encroaching water. We need to get out of here, now. We ran, stumbling over the uneven sand, desperately trying to get away from the waves that seemed to move with a mind of their own. But no matter how fast we ran, the ocean kept coming, and the ground beneath our feet seemed to be shifting, the beach growing darker and more twisted. I could feel it, the pull of the resort behind us. The feeling that we were being drawn back, that the walls of the place were reaching out to trap us once more. Where's the boat? Sarah screamed, her voice full of panic. There's no boat. I shouted back. We have to, but I didn't even know what we had to do. It felt like there was no escape, like this nightmare was never going to end. But then, as if on cue, the ground beneath us trembled. I looked over my shoulder, and there it was, the boat. It appeared out of nowhere, a small wooden vessel floating in the shallows, its ropes swaying as though it were waiting for us. There was no time to think. No time to question how or why it had appeared. We have to go, now. I shouted, dragging Sarah toward the boat. The moment we reached it, the ocean began to recede, but it wasn't the calm retreat of a normal wave. It was like the water was being sucked back into the depths of the sea, as though the ocean itself was trying to pull us in, to claim us as part of the resort's twisted curse. We scrambled into the boat, and I grabbed the oars, not caring that I had no idea how to row. The boat drifted out into the water, pulled by the current, but the moment we moved away from the shore, the mist seemed to lift. The moon shone brighter, and the oppressive feeling that had weighed on us began to fade. We didn't look back. Neither of us dared to. The boat slowly drifted further and further from the shore, the resort shrinking into the distance. The waves became gentler, the air warmer. There was no sign of the cursed force that had tried to claim us. It was as if the entire nightmare had simply vanished. Finally, after what felt like hours of silence, Sarah let out a shaky breath. I think we're safe. But I wasn't so sure. I stared out at the vast, empty ocean, my heart still racing. Was it really over? Could we ever truly escape the curse of the resort? Before I could say anything, I felt a cold gust of wind brush past me. The mist began to rise once more, swirling in the water around us, and then I heard a voice, soft, distant, but unmistakable. Welcome to your adventure. The words echoed in my mind, and I felt the icy grip of fear tighten in my chest. It wasn't over. The resort hadn't just let us go. We hadn't escaped, it had let us leave. But it was always waiting, always watching. The curse had followed us, and there was nowhere left to run. The water began to churn again, and the boat rocked violently. It was clear that this was just the beginning. But as the storm grew, we had only one choice: to survive. We might have escaped the resort, but it seemed that the nightmare would never truly end. And somewhere, in the distance, the waves kept whispering, "You'll be back." The end, or maybe just the beginning.